I do want to thank you for joining me this morning for our Bible study. Let's turn, if you would please, to Job 29 and verse number 1. Job 29 and verse number 1. That's where we'll start this morning. Let me just say, while you're turning to Job chapter 29, a written copy of this lesson can be found on my blog. The blog is entitled settledinheaven.wordpress.com. I have the address down on my YouTube channel page, if that would help to see it in writing. But it's settledinheaven, one word, .wordpress.com. When you get to the blog, look for the lesson entitled Going to Take a Sentimental Journey. Going to Take a Sentimental Journey. That's the lesson that we'll be looking at this morning. If you notice here in Job chapter 29, the text I would like you to read on your own is 29 verse 1 through 30 verse 31. So it's all of chapter 29 and all of chapter 30 is some of the things that we'll be looking at this morning. But especially what I would like us to notice is verses 1 and 2 to start with of Job 29. Listen to what's said. Job further continued his discourse and said, "Oh, that I were as in months past, as in the days when God watched over me." Okay, please keep in mind, Job was a man who faced many, many trials in his life. As a matter of fact, I have to say, at least for myself, one of the things that the Lord uses to encourage my heart when I'm going through trials is I try to recall everything Job was going through. Listen to some of the things that Job was going through, and you can read about this in the book of Job. Job lost his children. They were all killed in a whirlwind. He lost his property. As far as all of his earthly possessions, he lost. When I believe it was the Sabians came in and took all of his property. He lost his wife. She ended up walking away from him. She rejected him and she said, why don't you curse God and die? And she walks away from him. And not only that, but Job also lost his health. Now, folks, everything apart from Job's salvation, he basically had lost. Everything this world has to offer, Job basically lost. So the next time I start to feel sorry for myself, if I think back to Job and everything that he lost, I realize, Rob, you don't have it quite as bad as you might think you do. Okay, but anyhow, in this case, in Job chapter 29, verses 1 and 2, you can see where Job is thinking back on his life. He's thinking back to the days when he was greatly blessed of God. And now here he is sitting on an ash pile, boils all over his skin. He takes a broken piece of pottery and he's scraping these boils. He's in such bad shape the dogs actually come up and lick his boils to get the drainage out of his boils. That's what bad shape Job was in. So as he's sitting here scraping his boils and scraping his sores and watching them run and letting the dogs lick them, nobody's around but his friends, and as you study Job, I'm not sure how good of friends they actually were. He has no one left in the world. He has nothing of material value left in the world. His family is gone. His wife is gone. He's lost everything. And so he starts to think back to the days when the Lord had blessed him in great ways. He says, "Oh, that I was in the times past. When the Lord was blessing me richly for my faithfulness." But if you notice, in Job 30, at the very end of chapter 30, what was the end result of him looking back at all the blessings of God in his life? In Job 30 and verse number 31, it didn't seem to encourage him much. Listen to what he said. "My harp is turned to mourning and my flute to the voice of those who weep." If anything, it made Job feel worse. As he remembered all the blessed times of God, he began to miss those times. And now as he's sitting scraping his boils, he's thinking in his mind, "Oh, how I wish I was back there. Woe is me. I've lost everything. I have nothing left." See, in Job's case, looking back on his life and remembering the blessed times of his life were actually a hindrance to him. They actually hurt his cause because they had a tendency to depress him more than if he had never remembered them. If you remember Paul in his writings, in Philippians 3:13 through 15, Paul addresses the same issue that Job was facing here. As Job looked back, and as it only had a tendency to discourage him, Paul warns about that in Philippians 3:13 through 15. Listen to what's said. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do. Listen to this. Forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Here we find that even Paul understood, man, there's some things in my past life it's best I don't remember. Now, in Paul's case, I think he was more talking about the different sins he had committed against the Lord, and how looking back at those had a tendency to discourage him as well, because he knows some of those things he could never take back. Some of the ways he failed the Lord he could never undo, and he realized that. But in either case, the point I want us to see is this. Depending on a Christian's circumstances, there are times when it's best not to look back. There are times it's best to simply look forward, keeping our eyes on the Lord Jesus Christ, and look ahead, always striving to serve Him, no matter what our situation might be now or what our situation was in the past. So in some cases, and we'll talk more about what those cases are in just a minute, in some cases it's best not to remember our past. Job and Paul are two examples of that. But you know what? We also have examples of people who it helped when they look back on their life during times of trials. In 1 Samuel 17, we find King David. Now here in 1 Samuel 17, in verses 32 and through 37, we've got David ready to face Goliath the Philistine. Okay, and again, I think most of us know this story of how David stood up against this giant Goliath when no one else in the Israelite nation was willing to do it. He stood up to honor and to glorify his Lord. He stood up by faith. He faced this giant Goliath, and as we know, he defeated Goliath. But watch, one of the things that had helped David to be encouraged and to be strengthened to stand against Goliath, it was him remembering his past. Watch what's said in verse 33. You are not able, this is King Saul speaking to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, and struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, and struck and killed it. Okay, what was David doing? When King Saul confronted him and said, David, you can't do this. There's no way you can beat this giant named Goliath. What did David do? He looked back on his life, and he remembered how the Lord had blessed him previously. Watch David's conclusion in verse 36. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Man, I'll tell you, that's faith. David said, I remember how the Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear. He said, look, this Philistine's going to be the same as them because he stood up against the Lord. So now the Lord's going to stand up against him. And the Lord will simply use me to do away with this giant. What a blessing that is to know that David was able to look back on his life and receive encouragement, remembering how the Lord had blessed him. Again, I ask you, remember Job? It was just the opposite. He remembered how the Lord encouraged him in times past, and it only depressed him more. Remember Moses, and this is in Exodus 13:3, and I'll just have you read that later. I'm not even going to take the time to turn to it. In Exodus 13:3, Moses told the Israelites, "Boy, you remember from this day forward how Jehovah has led us out of Egypt." He called upon the nation to constantly remember how the Lord had delivered them from the Egyptian bondage. So, folks, there are times it's a good thing to look back and to remember how the Lord has blessed us, to encourage us and to strengthen us for the future. Okay, now the big question. What made the difference? What made the difference between David being encouraged by looking back and Job, who was discouraged by looking back? What made the difference between Moses commanding his people to always remember today and how the Lord is blessed, and Paul, who said, "Man, I'm leaving some things behind and I'm not looking back"? What was the difference? Anytime we're able to look back with eyes of faith, remembering what the Lord did, and then being able to say, you know what, I believe the Lord can do that for me in the future, it's a good thing to look back. Faith is what made the difference between David and Job. David looked back by faith, saying, if the Lord did that for me before, I know he can do it again. That's faith. Job didn't look back by faith. Job looked back more so with an attitude of consolation, where he said, look, this is the way things are going to be. I don't believe the Lord is going to change it. Even when I remember everything he did for me in times past, he's not going to change it now. See, that's the difference. Faith is what made the difference. So for us as Christians, when we're faced with trials, is it a good thing to look back and remember God's blessings in prior times? Absolutely, if we do it with faith. If we can equate in our minds the blessings of the past and the Lord being able to do it again in the future, absolutely. Look back and realize how good the Lord is and allow it to encourage our hearts. But if we find ourselves not able, just not having that faith at that point in time for whatever reason, because listen, there are times when it's difficult to have faith in the midst of trials. In those cases where we're struggling with our faith and our faith is so weak, sometimes it's best not to look back. Sometimes it's better to just keep our eyes on Christ and get through the trial without looking back to remember what he's done in our life. Just keep on going. Like Paul said. Folks, it's important we understand during times of trials, looking back can be good, but it's not always good. It all depends on what our state of faith is at that point in time. Those who are weak in faith, be careful looking back. Those who have stronger faith, absolutely look back and realize what the Lord has done in your past, he will do in the future as well. May the Lord bless you as you go through trials. May he bless you. May he bless you with faith so you can look back and realize what the Lord has done for you in the past, he will do for you again.